Hi, this is Jeff Lamb. Welcome to my podcast. It's called Losing My Mind. See, I've had this really interesting life so far. I've done things that I couldn't even dream of when I was a kid, dreaming of what my life might be. Well, I figured I'd better start putting some of these stories down somewhere before I really do lose my mind. These won't be in any particular order, and they're mostly for me, so I don't forget. But you're more than welcome to listen in. In the first podcast, I told you that later on down the road, I would mention what's wrong with radio, or why radio isn't cool anymore. Well, that's what this episode is. What's wrong with radio? Radio has just allowed itself to become irrelevant. Radio used to be where everybody went to hear their music. They went there for laughs. They went there for their news, for the weather, for the time. Well, now you can get your time on your phone. You can get your weather on your phone in an instant. You can get school closings on your phone. You can get all of the important things, including news, on the phone. And you can get your music on the phone, too, and you don't have to put up with all the commercials. And somehow radio hasn't realized how irrelevant they've become, and they've refused to change. They're doing the same things that they were doing in the 90s, with one exception. They keep firing all the talent, all the people that made the difference between the records. And if you want a classic example of that, what was the number one radio show a few years ago? It was Rush Limbaugh, who didn't play music, but he was number one because he was different than anything else, and because you couldn't get him anywhere else but radio. He wasn't on TV. He was on radio. And the days of Dick Orkin are over. He's gone. J.P. McCarthy is gone, another big radio legend. Bob and Tom, not the same. And dare I even say Jeff and Mark. We were number one on 3 different stations in Toledo. And it wasn't because we played Led Zeppelin better than anybody else. It's because of the things that we did in between the records. And we played Led Zeppelin. So I'm not suggesting that radio get rid of music altogether, because music's great. Music's awesome. There's no replacement for music and the memories that music brings and the emotions that a music brings. But it's the stuff that happens between the records. And what happens between the records now? The DJs shut up and they play more commercials. What kind of recipe for success is that? It's a terrible recipe. Why would I want to listen to radio when 30% of my drive is going to be listening to commercials? There have been times that I've driven from one end of Toledo to the other and haven't heard one song. It's been all commercials. Back when I was a boy and we were on WIOT doing mornings, not only were we trying to be number one and working really hard at it, but we were allowing 4 commercials and a break. That was it. But we charged dearly for those. They were $120, $90 for a 60-second commercial in our morning show. And that was on purpose. That was because it made the commercials special. You weren't buried in a 17 commercial break or even an 8 commercial break. Who's going to remember that number 4 commercial? Nobody. And back in the day, we used to separate car dealerships. Not anymore. Nope. Now, sorry. If your car dealership, Mr. Ford, is up against a Chevy, too bad, too sad. That's just the way we do business now. But back in the day, we used to separate that stuff. We didn't put 2 furniture stores in the same break. We didn't put 2 car dealerships in the same break. We didn't put 2 of any business in the same break. We just didn't. And I was never a guy that studied radio. I wasn't even a guy that sat around in the DJ lounge after the show talking about the 3rd cut of the 2nd album on side 2 of Pink Floyd. A lot of DJs did that, and they were really into that. I just wasn't. I was into creating more content. I wanted to do more bits, and I couldn't do them at the station because as soon as you got into a production room and you start doing a bit, somebody pops in and says, hey, I got priority. It's a commercial. We got to get this on the air. It's got to be done right now. So I always had a studio at home. And when I got off the air, I went home, and I wasn't done. That wasn't the end of my day. I sat down and I wrote bits, and then I recorded the bits, did all the voices, mixed it down, and listened to it, and edited this out, and added this, and it was ready for the next day's show. And I had to do that every day. I would do a show, and as soon as it was over, that bit was burnt. It was done. That was it. Now it's on to the next one. And that's part of the work of being a number one morning show. You've got to do the work. And though I wasn't really a student of radio, I can't tell you what song 3 was on side 2 of the Pink Floyd album. Somehow we were able to be successful. And it's, I think, because we had some good radio IQ or radio instincts. We were number one at IoT. Then we went to XKR. And in one rating book, which is 3 months, we went from worst to first, last place to the number one station. Then we left there and went back to IoT, and they were number one again. So that's 3 stations in Toledo that we were able to make number one. And it wasn't because I was a student of radio. The type of radio that I was doing was different than anybody else. A lot of people would say it's dead. It was theater of the mind radio, which was the 40s and 50s. That's what radio was then. But now I can tell you that radio doesn't even care about being number one. They don't. We used to compete really hard to be number one back when you could only own one FM and one AM station. And we wanted to be number one because it mattered. That's how we could charge $120 a commercial, was because we were the number one station, giving them the most ears. Now, number one is just too hard. Why bother? We've got a group of 7 stations, so we'll just sell the whole group. And we don't have to spend as much money. We don't have to work as hard. I'll give you a classic example of the difference between radio today and 1990. In 1990, we had a bit where we sent Rain Man, which was one of the characters that I did. We sent him off to the Big Apple Deli here in Toledo to get us breakfast. Well, he left and he didn't come back. And the next day, he calls in and goes, "Hey, you guys, I'm definitely lost. Would you come get me?" "Yeah, I'm really getting scared." And we'd say, "Rain Man, where are you? Are you at the Big Apple Deli?" The what? "The Big Apple Deli." "No, you told me to go to the Big Apple, so I'm here, but I'm lost. Will you come get me?" So that could have all been faked in the studio. We could have done, I was doing all the voices, and we could have added sound effects, and we could have faked the whole thing and made it entertaining. But that's not the way Pete Kavanaugh did things. He sent us to New York. We jumped on a plane. We were broadcasting from Casey Kasem's studio at Westwood One in New York. We would go out during the afternoon, and I'd walk up to a cop, and I'd say, "Here's what we're doing, play along." He'd say, "Okay." So I'd say, "Hey, have you seen Rain Man?" He goes, "Yeah, I just seen him. He was in the Washington Square fountain. He was dancing with some bum. It was amazing. He was drawing quite a crowd, though." Then I went up to a guy at a magazine stand, and I said, "Have you seen Rain Man?" "Yes, he was here. He tried to buy a Playboy." I said, "Sure, little boy. Go away. You're too young." But these were real people on the real streets saying things like, it wouldn't have dawned on me that he was in the fountain at Washington Square Park, but this cop said it. And it was a great line. That's why Pete sent us to New York, to get the real bite of the apple, if you will. And that's caring. That's trying to be number one. Now, they would never do that. They would never send anybody, any place, to do something like that. That's just not radio anymore. Now it's, let's fire another guy and let's voice track from another city and we'll just get on with it. And you know what? Not for nothing, these are publicly owned airwaves. Even though the businesses have them at the time, the licenses are issued by the government. And part of that agreement is you will do X amount of local programming. Well, there are stations in town that there's not a local person working there. They're all syndicated or voice tracked from other cities. There's no local programming. How is that serving the community? The station would send us places several times a year. I remember in 1991, they sent us to Los Angeles for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Well, we're in this great big ballroom, and they seated us along the side. It had a sunken area in the center, and that's where all the stars sat. And of course, they sat all the DJs and contest winners, people like that. And they told us, do not go down in that area. Your pass is this area up here only. Do not go down in that pass. You will be thrown out. We said, okay. And as soon as they left, I said to Mark, I said, okay, I'm going down. You coming? He said, well, no. See, Mark never was a rule breaker. That's probably why Mark lasted in radio a lot longer than I did. But anyway, he was never a rule breaker. And I wasn't trying to just be a jerk. This was an opportunity, man. When else am I ever going to rub elbows with some of these people? So I go down there. I take my program. I thought maybe I'll get some signatures. So I went down there, and the first person I saw was Patrick Swayze and Brooke Shields. And I walked up to Patrick, and I said, "Hey, Patrick, would you sign this?" And he said, "Wrong guy, asshole." It was David Keith, who looked a lot like Patrick Swayze. That didn't go well. I thought, well, this is going to get me thrown out of here. So I threw my program off to the side, and I just started walking around. And I'm working around between the tables, and there's Cher sitting with Pia Zadora and Jason Priestley. And as I turn, I actually literally bumped noses with Michael Douglas, who was down there. I don't know what he was doing at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony, but okay. But that was the year they inducted Laverne Baker and the Byrds and John Lee Hooker and Ike and Tina Turner, Wilson Pickett. Bonnie Raitt was there. John Fogerty was there. They inducted Creedence, too, that year, I believe, and John Fogerty was there. He accepted his award with his other bandmates, but when he got up to perform their music, he left them sitting at a table, and he performed it with Bruce Springsteen, Paul Schaefer, Bonnie Raitt, all the other, and the band got up and walked out. They were ticked. So the rivalry was still alive. But what a great time that was. And I saw Bruce Springsteen sitting at a table going over his notes, and I patted him on the back and said, "Hey, good luck tonight." He goes, "Hey, thanks a lot." I remember when I patted him on the back, it was like hitting a brick wall. This guy was solid, man. He was something. But what a great time that was. And then we went back to the studio the next morning and broadcast live and told stories of what we had done. We didn't have any guests. We didn't do any interviews, but we had a great time. And we were able to be there, and that kind of stuff was important back then because we were taking the listeners with us by being there and being able to tell them the stories. And how many people have been to a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony? So we could tell them what it was like. The next year, it was in New York at the Waldorf Astoria. Now, we weren't in the ballroom that time. I don't know if it had anything to do with the fact I was walking around the lower level I wasn't supposed to be in. I don't think it was. But we got access to the press room, which, as it turns out, was even better because all the inductees and the people that were inducting them came right through this little press room. And there was a stage right in front of us. We were in the front row in front of this stage. Well, look who came in. It was Elton John with RuPaul, 2 feet away. After them, it was Paul McCartney, Yoko Ono, Julian Lennon, Sean Lennon. They were inducting John Lennon that year, just 2 feet away. And it was just one after another. It was just a wonderful time. Matter of fact, before the whole thing started, I walked out. I left the press room to go to the men's room. I'm right between the press room and the men's room. And there's 2 big doors in front of me, and they fly open, and Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney, Bruce Springsteen, and his wife were all arm in arm walking through that door. And all these cameras are pop, 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 flashing, and I'm in the middle of it. I'm just on my way to hit the John. So now I'm standing there watering the porcelain, and standing next to me is Jeff Beck. And I said, "How about that?" He goes, "That was something, wasn't it?" They were always sending us somewhere. They sent me down to Lakeland to cover the Detroit Tigers. I'd never done that before. It was so cool. I wandered into a conversation around the locker room entrance between Alan Trammell, Lou Whitaker, Cecil Fielder, and they were talking about Cecil Fielder's kid, who Cecil said, "He's 5 years old, man. He can run into me and knock me over if I'm squatted." He says, and he can hit a ball out of Tiger Stadium. 5 years old. Turns out he could, often, because when he got older, he was Prince Fielder. On the second day, the Tigers were playing the Cincinnati Reds. So we get off to wherever they're playing, and I'm standing around, a little intimidated by the surroundings, because I'd never done this before. So I'm kind of watching the other reporters and what they're doing, and I didn't want to overstep my bounds. I had gotten yelled at the day before because I got George Brett's autograph for my nephew in the dugout. And they threatened to revoke my press credentials. You don't do that. That's their space. That's their area. If they come to you at the fence line and they offer to sign, that's different. But don't walk up to them when they're on the bench. Okay, lesson learned. So day 2, I'm being real careful because I don't want to lose my press credentials. And I noticed that Johnny Bench, they were just miking him up in a dugout. He was a big announcer for the Cincinnati Reds. So I just went and leaned against the dugout, and I'm just watching him mic him up, and he looks up at me and goes, "Do you need to be there?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, then get the out of here. Just beat it. Get lost. Seriously, get out of here. Go away from me. And I mean, he was really making sure everybody in the park heard this. So now I'm convinced I'm going to get my press credentials revoked. I walked over by the batting cage, and I was just trying to be invisible as I could. And I feel this hand on my shoulder. I thought, oh, no. And I hear, how you doing? Ernie Harwell. Well, I turn around. I said, Ernie, I knew it was you as soon as you opened your mouth. He said, what's your name? I said, Jeff Lamb. He says, where are you from, Jeff? I said, I'm from Toledo. Toledo, the Mud Hens. I love me some Mud Hens. I like to get down there and watch them. Great place to watch baseball down there. And he just starts talking to me. I was sure I was going to get kicked out, but no, it was Ernie Harwell, the nicest man I ever met in my life. And it was like talking to an uncle. He was everything you'd heard on the radio and more. Just as friendly and nice as he could be. Didn't struggle for small talk. He could talk about the weather and make it interesting. He could talk about anything, and we did. And I just kept thinking, wow, he really likes me. He's talking to me, and he won't go away. And what he was doing, apparently he had seen what Johnny Bench did. And he waited for Johnny Bench to finish, and so he was talking to me. And when Johnny finished and was walking past, he said, hey, Johnny, I got a friend of mine I'd like you to meet. This is Jeff from Toledo. And he made him come up and shake my hand. And he did, and then he walked away. And Ernie just excused himself at that point, said, enjoy yourself, Jeff. That was such a class act. It was the nicest man I ever met and the biggest horse's ass I ever met in the same day in a few minutes. To this day, I've never met a bigger jerk than Johnny Bench. And he was a hero of mine growing up. I was a catcher. That's why I was hanging by him. I was a fan until that moment. And then later, I'm up in the press lunchroom, and there's all these guys from the Detroit paper there, and they're all palling around and playing grab ass, and they all know each other, and I don't, so I'm sitting by myself. Well, in walks Ernie Harwell, and it's like Norm walking into Cheers. Everybody goes, Ernie! And he goes, how you doing, boys? And he looked over, and he saw me sitting by myself, and he says, hey, mind if I sit with you, Toledo? I said, absolutely not. And we sat down and had lunch and just had the nicest conversation. And as we're wrapping it up, he says, hey, if you ever want to get a hold of me to talk baseball, and he writes his number down and hands it to me. His home number. Unbelievable experience. But those are things that DJs today will never experience because the radio, corporate radio, is not doing that kind of thing. And I had all these great stories to tell on the radio. I remember when DJs used to do remote broadcasts from car dealerships or different stores or whatever. They drew a crowd because, A, DJs were important. They were cool people. Everybody wanted to meet the DJ. It was the guy they listened to every day or had breakfast with or went to bed listening to. And we always had goodies to give away. We gave away the latest CDs by your favorite group, and we gave away T-shirts from the station and bumper stickers, and people would drive across town to get that stuff. Now, they give you nothing. They don't even send DJs to these things. They have the nerve to charge a ridiculous amount of money, and then they'll send an intern or a sales guy that nobody knows, none of the listeners know, and they'll sit there with nothing to give away. They'll scoop up their money at the end of the day, and they're gone. They've done nothing for the business. I don't know if it's too broken to fix or if it's just too late to fix it, but it would sure be hard to make radio right again. They've seemingly gone out of their way to ruin an institution that I loved growing up. My dad was in radio. I was in radio. My brother was in radio. My sister had a hit record on radio. Radio was always important to me, and what they've done to it is embarrassing. If you're in radio and I've struck a nerve with you or ticked you off or you think I'm wrong, please email me or give me a call and come on the podcast with me and tell me why radio is good now. You can email me at jefflam123@yahoo.com. That's it for this episode. I'll see you next time on Losing My Mind.